Let me welcome you all to San Diego Independent Scholars hosted talks at its monthly meetings. And I'd like to say a particular thank you to Dorothy Parker and Jack Cummings. Dorothy Parker is the president of the association, the organization, and Jack Cummings is the technology and Zoom guru. And they're both sort of doing some hosting of this meeting and making sure that everything runs smoothly, while I and the speakers will do talking. So I'll try to be brief. Just a little housekeeping. We have events set up already for December. Instead of the usual holiday party, we're going to have a special Zoom party, holiday party from 2 to 4 on Sunday, December 6th. So this year, the party will feature readings from the anthology in which SDIS members have recorded their experiences and thoughts during the COVID-19 pandemic. 31 authors have contributed over 50 pieces that include poems, essays, travel, and adventure stories, humorous pieces, and even artwork. The gala event will also feature some celebrations at the end of 2020, so you can bring your party hats and noisemakers. The Zoom link to that will be sent a few days before the party. At our regular meeting in January, on January 16th, our speaker will be Christopher Wills, a professor of biological sciences emeritus at UCSD, who will speak to us about Indonesia and its place in human evolution. And on February 20th, our speaker will be Gerald Chun, a medical doctor and PhD, who's professor and senior vice president of the Neuroscience Drug Discovery at Sanford Burnham Prebys Medical Discovery Institute. And his topic will be, does internal DNA editing cause Alzheimer's disease? So now, a moment before I'm about to introduce the two speakers we have today, it's about a novel situation. Usually we have one speaker and then a Q&A period. Today we have two people with slightly different views on the future of humanity, one a little bit more pessimistic, one a little bit more optimistic. And the way this will work is each speaker will have 25 minutes to make a presentation, and then it'll be opened up to a 10-minute Q&A roughly. And the first person in the Q&A, if he chooses to, can be the other speaker if they have a question or a comment they want to make very briefly. And then at the end of that period, the second speaker will have their 25-minute session and a Q&A following that with the same basic idea. So without further ado, let me introduce the speakers. One speaker is a member of SDIS, and well known to us. That's Willard Wells. He earned his PhD in theoretical physics and mathematics at the California Institute of Technology in 1959, where his advisor was Richard Feynman. And Willard worked at the Caltech Jet Propulsion Laboratory from 1957 to 1967, where he founded the Quantum Electronics Group and was co-inventor of the satellite de-spin mechanism. Subsequently, he worked at L3 Photonics from 1967 to 1994, where he worked on applied physics, optics, and fiber optics. Willard has also been involved in making informed predictions about the future of mankind. And he is author of Prospects for Human Survival, actually second edition, and Apocalypse When, Calculating How Long the Human Race Will Survive. Our second speaker is Ron Peterson, also a PhD physicist. Ron went to Caltech as an undergraduate, and apparently he roomed with a future Nobel Prize winner, so a lot of stuff obviously rubbed off on him because he went on to a very successful career in his own right. Ron earned his PhD from the University of Illinois in condensed matter physics in 1972 and pursued research in low temperature physics and solar energy. He moved to Honeywell and for many, many years, where he rose to become their vice president of technology and their futurist. And since then, he's been very active in a number of areas, including being a consultant, a teacher, a writer, public speaker, and publisher. He has 2 books out, a memoir called An Introvert Learns to Fly, and a science fiction novel that peeks at the future called Gardeners of the Universe. He has started a series of future talks about today's major technical and society trends, and is planning additional books in multiple genres. So our first speaker is going to be Willard Wells.
So I'm the pessimist of the two. That makes me very lucky. Pessimists are happy people because they expect the worst, and the worst doesn't happen. I feel very sorry for optimists. They expect the best, and the best doesn't happen. So anyway, here we go. This is actually a song, but this is just a picture from a still from it. I didn't know how to put the song in. This is the percentage of humanity that it takes to kill off all of humanity if you've got a madman or something that wants to do harm. And this is time on this axis. So this represents people with tomahawks or spears and such, and then they develop swords. And here we get into nuclear weapons, and then you have multi-nation nuclear power and so on. And it gets down to a place where it takes very few people, perhaps only a couple, one or two, to wipe out the human race. So here's what renowned scholars have said. John von Neumann: ever accelerating technology is approaching some essential singularity beyond which human affairs cannot continue. Bill Joy, he published Why the Future Doesn't Need Us in Wired magazine. Martin Rees, a fellow of the Royal Society with all Astronomer Royal and Baron and all sorts of royal titles, says there's a 50-50 chance in the next 100 years of something I think is killing off 1 million people or more. Stephen Hawking said, the late Stephen Hawking, that we must colonize outer space for long-term survival, that what's going on Earth just isn't secure enough. John Leslie is a Canadian philosopher. He says there's a 70% chance of surviving for 5 centuries. One approach would be a numerical simulation with the risk analysis. That's futile, because imagine that if the time were 1930 and we were trying to forecast nuclear winter, cobalt bomb, global warming, self-replicating robots, all these kinds of threats just wouldn't make any sense. So we can't use that kind of bottom-up risk analysis. Instead, we have to turn to some top-down, more abstract scheme. For natural hazards, we have a comfortable 2,000 century survival history, from Neanderthals to Homo erectus. But for man-made threats, we have a very precarious half-century, so we don't have the same survival history for man-made threats, which are by far the greatest. Now, what we would really like to do is to have a grand galactic book of knowledge and look up other humanoid species and find out what has happened to them. Unfortunately, we don't have this book available and haven't been able to contact anybody. Here's some of the survival hazards: climate change, overpopulation, excessive wealth, things like eventually there'll be trillionaires and with the help of inflation, and they just have more power than any individual ought to be trusted with. It just takes one crazy. Proliferating technology, geoengineering. There was actually an item. There was a real occurrence where somebody did some if you take a lot of powdered iron and sprinkle it in the ocean, you get a plankton bloom. It turns green, and some guy actually did this and was arrested, but when you're a private individual over the ocean or seeding aerosols in the stratosphere, you don't come under the jurisdiction of anybody's law. So, and then one can make all kinds of additional lists like artificial intelligence and doomsday device like the infamous cobalt.
Ron, I'm sorry, Willard, your voice fades out. Could you please speak a little louder and into the microphone more? Thanks.
What's this? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. This is a toxic red tide that happened. This particular one is in New Zealand. It was the prettiest picture I could find of a red tide. Shellfish get poisoned and they die, and occasionally and people eat the shellfish and get sick. And as I recall, maybe one or two people have died from this kind of toxic thing. Well, this can mutate, it can spread. It's very unlikely, but there are so many very unlikely things that could happen that the chance of one of them happening is not negligible. This is cyanobacteria, the so-called blue-green algae that was responsible for the great oxygenation event. Other planets have atmospheres of carbon dioxide. This is the one that created the oxygen that we breathe and made our life possible. So Earth has two stable states, one with oxygen, one with carbon dioxide. Supposedly it could flip back under some circumstance. This is a graph of unsafe concentration of wealth. Look at this red one, the top 1/100th of 1% of the wealthy. And this ordinate here is the percentage of household wealth. And it's just going up and up. It's headed for 20% here. And with that kind of wealth, it just takes one or a small number of crazies. Now, there are two kinds of survivors. There are things that wear out, decompose, or obsolesce at some characteristic age. Individual animals, such as ourselves, uh, mechanisms that wear out, like cars, drugs that expire, food that spoils. Here's now, past, and future. So they tend to have this is a time axis, they tend to have a duration indicated by the green bar that is has a characteristic length. Now, sometimes one of them dies a little early, like that short one. Some others are longer lived. So the right side in the future is kind of the ragged, and the left side. Uh, so it's vaguely like a parallelogram. The other kind of survivor is things that do not wear out. It might last for days or centuries. Things like a business firm, a stage production, species, civilization, nations, space program, political parties, and they tend to have an overall triangular shape here because the, the things that we find are more likely to be the ones that have lasted for a long time. So they have long pasts and long futures, and the survival prospects improve with age. Well, the things we're talking about, civilization and species, namely humanity, have this kind of shape. Examples, two kinds of survivors. Jack Jones Sr. is 88, Jr. is 44. You hear that Jack Jones died, and you assume it's the elder one, unless you hear otherwise. An example of the other one is a clock by Geyser 1 says it has been spouting for 10 years. A clock by Geyser 2 says it has been spouting for 10 minutes. You're walking by there and you hear some sound subside without even looking. You know it's the younger one that quit spouting. So for things that wear out, survival prospects dwindle with age. For things that do not wear out, survival prospects improve with age. So we're talking about these kinds of things when we talk about the human race or the survivability of civilization. So the survival prospects improve with age. I looked up a lot of things in the library to get statistics and test my ideas. The Portuguese keep good statistics, so that's the only reason for Portuguese business firms. And this is the fraction of firms surviving after as a function of time, and they tend to obey this simple rule here, where this quantity J is a fudge factor that's different for each entity. These are Canadian service firms, and they obey the same thing by plotting it on a logarithmic scale. The ones that obey the law are straight lines. And you can see that after a long time, there's a little bit of obsolescence here. When I say things that where were we back here? Things that do not wear out and things that do wear out. Well, it's not a strict separation. some things wear out, but only very slowly. So, and I thought I should probably show you the worst case. This, I was looking at statistics of the London theater and how long a stage plays lasted. Well, here in the year 1901 and 1902, things started to die off when they were down to just 40, when their numbers were down to 45%. And then that lasted a couple of years, and then everything came back to normal, and they didn't die off at a faster rate until they were down to like less than 10%. So I want to jump ahead now and give you my survivability of civilization. The dashed red curve there is the probability of civilization survival as a function of future population time in billions of people centuries. That turns out to you can for billions of for people centuries, you can add the world population each year, or you can look at the lifetimes of everybody who's ever lived and add them up. Well, you can add up the people centuries one person at a time, or you can add them up 1 year at a time, and the latter is much more sensible. And it's kind of discouraging. Look here at the half-life. And when you convert those people centuries to actual time, you get 14 to 64 years. So today's children might see civilization's downfall. This guru Ben Goertzel thinks that intervention by artificial intelligence, so-called AI, is our best hope. In his article on the subject, he seemed to think that some democratic process might actually bring about that intervention of artificial intelligence. I doubt that. I don't think there's any time for a democratic process. I think that the artificial intelligence, if it is smart enough, will and has our best interests in its mind, will simply have to blindside us and usurp the power. I couldn't resist this cartoon. Our best outcome may be an AI nanny that loves us, and this is the probability of human extinction as a function of future population time, again in billions of people centuries. And so what's going on here is there is some fudge factors that I can diddle with that I don't really know, but they give a very broad range here, and this is my best estimate. Now, this kind of doesn't make sense, because if I have a statistical sample of humanoid species, there should be a they have a half-life, and I watch the statistical sample, and when half of them die off, that's the half-life, one number. But we don't have that statistical sample, so we have to do something theoretical to get a range, and it's this very broad range here. Basic probability theory. Consider events J and K. Then the probability of both events is the probability of J times the probability of K. In other words, and means multiply. If I roll a paradise, the chance of a double chance of 2 6s is 1 in 36. 6 for one die and 6 for the other. The chance of rolling 10 is the chance of 5 and 5, which is 1/36, but it's also the chance of 4 and 6 and 6 and 4. So you get 3 possibilities, and it's 1 chance in 12. So the probability of survival to a given future, given the past, that's what this parenthesis, that's kind of engineering, math notation. I have the probability, which I call G, and then this vertical line here means given. The probability of the future, given the past, is a product of a whole bunch of terms raised to the powers alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and so which total 1 in all. And Z here denotes the hazard exposure for ordinary hazards. Y, and there are far too many here. So I have to group them in categories. And so instead of alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and so on to omega, I have to have just 3 of them. 1 for ordinary hazards, 1 for digital hazards, and 1 for natural hazards. However, the future is much less than the past, which is 2,000 centuries, the time the human race has been around. And so this last one is essentially 1, and I just have these 2.
Willard is 5-minute mark. 5 more minutes.
Okay, 5 more minutes. Here I have proxies for ordinary man-made hazards to calibrate the rate of acceleration where things are moving faster and faster as we go into the future. And one of these curves is electric power. Another one is consumption of rare earth elements, which is minerals, which is going faster, which represents high tech. Electric power is pretty much low tech. Other things are GDP, which gross world GDP, which is just all the nations added together. And so these are proxies for man-made hazards. Now, whereas this one, you see a logarithmic scale here. Here's a factor of 10. Here's another factor of 10. But Moore's law, the fact that digital activity, originally it was the number of transistors that could be put on one chip. That's what Gordon Moore invented his Moore's law for. But then eventually you get to the place where each transistor is one molecule, but you can keep extrapolating because of other improvements in computing power and proxies for digital tech, many orders of magnitude. So that one tends to take over. This guy, Philip Metzer, is not particularly famous or anything, but he's just a guy who explained it in a way that I like. Alternatives to Earth as a habitat for maintaining the human race. Forget about Mars and the Moon; they're inhospitable. And why, if you escape gravitation once, why would you then want to trap yourself in another gravitational field? What you should do is make an artificial habitat. And this guy imagined what I imagine many other people have is an industrial revolution on the moon, where you can mine lunar materials so that you don't have to lift them out of Earth's gravity to make the habitats that you need. Now the late Gerard O'Neill was a professor at Princeton University, and he assigned his class the job of seeing if you could make a cylinder and rotate it so that you have an artificial on the gravity on the inside. Now this is the inside, and you have alternate transparent stripes where the sunlight can come in with land here. Here's grass and trees and lakes, and this rotates to make centrifugal force so that people can walk around and live normal lives on the inside surface. And that turned out to be remarkably feasible.
Okay. Well, then you have to finish up now, okay? Because it's hard enough.
So for a national survival colony, the absolute best thing would be a ballistic missile submarine. They have the nuclear power you need. They can generate their own oxygen. And another sort of crazy thing that if we're forced into it would be a hydrothermal vent. Uh, these cracks in the seafloor generate all kind of weird uh, life, and some of them must be edible. I don't know that anybody's ever tried eating one of these things, but if you didn't have anything else to eat, your personal survival colony, there are missile silos in Kansas where you can actually buy your own apartment. They have they have their own independent fuel supplies and generators and things that take them off the grid. Uh, there are at the southern tip of South America, there's an awful lot of water. There's the Antarctic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean all come together. And there are actual, there's a town there that's up for grabs. I don't think people live in these houses anymore. If you recall, at the tip of South America, there are some islands, and they kind of make an arc around and join on to the to the Antarctic continent. In Tierra del Fuego. I want to caution you about pondering about the apocalypse too intently. This is what can happen to you. Actually, this is just a joke, because what happened is I was at a Christmas party, and the photographer noticed that I was very close to this overhead lamp, and he got down on the floor and just as a joke made this position that gave this effect. Now, I gave this talk to Mensa, where they're very concerned about IQ tests. That's how you become a Mensa. And this is a test. This bus is in North America, and it's traveling forward. Is it moving to the right or to the left, or is it indeterminate due to the symmetry? So that concludes my talk.
Thank you very much, Willard, the talk, and we'll pause here. And so now we'll go to questions and answers. So Ron, did you have any comment to make or a question?
I'd like to make a comment or two, if that's possible.
Sure. Short ones, yeah.
Okay, I mean, I think I've read Willard's book a few times, especially the crucial chapter 4, which is where all these equations show up. I'm not able to find an error in the equations, but I'd like to summarize his arguments as I see them and as I explain them to my wife. Basically, this guy came to the conclusion that if something's been around for a long time, it's likely to stay around for a long time, maybe half as long as it already existed. And since Willard is dealing with the length, the lifetime of civilization or humanity itself, those things have existed for hundreds of centuries, or at least a lot. It depends on how you define civilization. So that's his way of looking at it, and it would think, oh, okay, that means that we're going to be around for another 1,000 centuries. However, what he's done is he said, okay, that's true, but around 1940, we started finding ways to destroy ourselves with nuclear bombs and things like that, and that those hazards have been increasing at a tremendous rate. So in a sense, he said, we've only, in that environment, we've only been around for 70 years. So as a result of that, he can say, okay, so then on statistically, we can only exist for another, civilization can only exist for another 14 to 60 years or so. That's kind of the core of his argument, I think. What I think, and I'll bring it up in my talk quite a bit, is that there's three problems with that. And I don't know if you want to address these now, Willard, or separately, but there's really three issues. One is that as these hazards happen, as we, encounter a new virus, for example, what happens is that people learn from that experience. So that as long as that experience doesn't kill us all or destroy civilization, we learn from it. And that's kind of what happened in Asia, where Taiwan and Hong Kong and Singapore did much better with this virus than Europe and the US have done. So people learn from their mistakes. That's my first point. And I don't think his analysis accounts for that. A second is that people, is that people tend to gang up and try to solve problems. Children in particular try to solve problems, and I'll bring that out in my talk as well. They throw themselves at the problems of the day, and there can be some very, very smart people who will work on these problems. And the other key thing, which I think, which maybe Willard's analysis hasn't included, is the fact that even though we're developing all these dangers, hazards, and potential life and civilization threatening things, we're also developing technologies and experience which are also accelerating at a tremendous rate. So they're accelerating as fast as the dangers. So everything's speeding up, but I think that's kind of a counter to the, just saying, okay, every time there's a hazard, I think it's also true that every time there's a hazard, people are working on it, and we've got more technology to solve it. So those would be my comments. I don't know if Willard wants to comment on my.
Perhaps Willard, maybe you can make your comments at the end of Willard's talk, and since he's going to be saying these things anyway, at that point, you can respond to them. Is that okay?
Yeah, well, I want to mention my books. Do not buy this one. It's obsolete. It was published by Springer, Apocalypse Web.
Book, a lot of the same things that he talked about.
You get your chance later.
Yeah, I've been reading it carefully.
Project Human Survival.
Buy this one either. If you're inclined toward mathematics, why, I recommend you buy Prospects for Human Survival. So I'll shut up now.
Okay, I'll open it up to general questions. Are there any questions? Remember, use the raise your hand thing. Click on participants at the bottom of your screen, and then you should see an option of raising your hand. So if you want to do that, I can see your hands going up if I see a hand going up.
Where's participants?
Okay, somebody had a hand up, and then, yeah, I think it was, did Glenn Bacon have a question? I saw a hand go up a second ago.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
So Scripps must be working on the problem of the red tide and blue algae problem, aren't they? Do you know anything about that? No?
I can answer that, and I can't raise my hand. Somehow I came in on a SDIS information, so I can't raise it. Yes, and red tides have been around a long time, and so they're in sort of an evolutionary equilibrium. And certainly, yes, the Scripps in a lot of places are working on it.
Any other questions? Janet Delaria?
Hello. You mentioned the man who was proposing that AI just super invent and go around everything and take over humanity. Who was that person again?
Ben Goertzel.
Ben Yerksel?
Mentioned
Thank you.
Phil Metzger too. That was the picture.
Oh, the Phil Metzger was in the picture? Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Hard to see here. I don't
Yeah.
see any hands up.
You're so,
Joan's not, she hasn't used the raise hand thing, but she's waving her hand.
Oh, okay,
I don't know whether she knows how to
that's fine. Okay, Joan, you want to ask your question?
yeah, she's muted her.
Hear me?
Yeah, a little louder.
Louder. Okay. What's this business about living on the moon? The moon's gravity is very different from Earth. So our physiology is going to be messed up. So that's kind of a fantasy thing out of a comic book. Will, are you going to the moon, Will? How about you guys? Which one? Are either one of you guys going to the moon to take the human race? And there's not enough water to support agriculture to keep us alive. That's fantasy.
well, I guess people can hear me.
Yeah.
The moon is a very hostile place. It's exposed to solar rate to extremes of temperature. Of course, at the poles there are. They say there's a little bit of water at the poles where they're in constant shadow, but it's just exposed to the hard vacuum, to the particles radiating from the sun, to extremes of temperature, and it's a place where we should have an industrial revolution, but not with people involved, except to help set up the industrial revolution and then let it run its course. Because it ought to be mining the resources from the moon so that you don't have to hoist them up from Cape Canaveral, but it ought to be robots which can be controlled, or at least initially from the Earth, and then hopefully later that the artificial intelligence on the moon can continue the process of an industrial revolution there, using materials from the moon.
Yeah. We have time for one last question. I don't see anybody ready. If not, why don't we go to Ron?
Al Corrupted raised his hand.
What's that?
Al raised his hand.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Okay. Okay, Al, you want to ask your question?
Yes. So Willard, if as we get more and more technology, we're getting closer and closer, perhaps to the end of life's survival as diminishing. Do you recommend that we change what we do in our daily life because of this kind of pessimistic, maybe, chances of survival?
Yes. Make your own survival colony. If you've got enough money, make your own survival colony somewhere.
Do you think we should get these kits you can buy with, water and food and that kind of thing?
The prepper stuff?
Yeah.
No. No, I don't think that's Maybe you should join the Navy and get assigned to a nuclear submarine.
Should we worry, Willard, should we worry about this?
Being SDIS, have more programs on the subject, yes.
Okay, thank you, Willard, for a very interesting lecture.
Okay. Ron, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. All set.
Okay. Oops. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, so I will begin. Hiding under the pictures is the SDIS, or your logo, which I thought really fit my title of my talk, Peek at the Future, because it looks like an eyeball. I've started getting involved in thinking about the future probably back when I was still at Honeywell. I had to predict which kind of products would be successful in the future. I became known almost as a futurist within the company. We made, $1 million bets on products. So I had to develop systems that looked at trends and also at the things that influence trends, and developed a whole mathematical system based on something that I learned at the Stanford Research Institute. And so I've been trying to apply some of those things to looking at more general future problems. After I left Honeywell, about a few years later, I was teaching a teenage class where there's some very bright kids in there. And I looked at them and I said, you guys have no idea what's coming up in the future and that you're going to have to deal with. And so I'm going to write a book and put your names all in the book so you can see what your futures are going to look like. At least that's what I did, and I started writing that. I wrote about things which were similar to Bluetooth and smartphones. I predicted a couple of wars in the Middle East and so on. And then I got distracted by a dozen other things. And when I finally got back to the book, I discovered that a lot of things I'd predicted had already happened. So I had to rewrite the whole thing, and I started up again in 2016 or 17 or so. Anyway, that's how I started thinking about the future. If I say anything today that interests you, you can certainly write back to me. I think these slides will show up in the notes that come out of the meeting. So you could certainly email me or write or check out my publisher's site, which has a lot of information called ptbbooks.com. Anyway, so as I decided to write that book, I had to figure out how to predict the future. And so I wanted to use this slide because I went to a lot of trouble to make it. But I just wanted to make the point that it's not trivial to predict the future. And the key point I would say is it's hard to predict in the near term. You get things like new viruses or elections or wars that throw everything off. It's actually easier to predict things that are farther in the future. You can look at long-range trends and things which are sort of unstoppable developments, and actually have a fairly good view of things which will appear some point in the future, things which will happen. I applied that in particular to technical things and scientific things which I was most familiar with. If you look at the future now, there's a slew of things which are going on. I tried to make a list of things that people could be excited about or worried about, which is on this sheet. Let me try yes, it's a tornado of change. Anyway, and I've been trying to do a future talk about these things and actually do analysis of some of these changes. I found is that it's really hard to do these for things which are social changes, things like racial discord or things like that are very hard to analyze. Depends a lot on details. I did create a survey where I would really appreciate if any of you can look at the notes of this later and type in all these letters at the bottom, which would go to a survey where I'm trying to figure out which of these changes people are most worried about and which ones they're most excited about positively. And so if you have a chance in the future, please take a look and try to do that. Well, as I said, most of these things that I've looked at, I ended up trying to put in my book, which is called Gardeners of the Universe. It's a story about the next 50 to 100 years. And it's where I had to sort of figure out, well, what do I really think is going to happen in the future? It's kind of a sci-fi book. There are aliens in there, but they're really there to take a look at what we're doing. They're coming to look and say, well, how are humans going to do in the next 100 years? That's sort of their purpose. And this book it's sci-fi, but it doesn't have any, time warps or faster than light travel or things like that, or it's not 2,500 years in the future. It's really about the near term. On the other hand, it's not actually a futurist book where, it's a cold analysis. These are the things which are likely to happen. I came at it from the point of view of looking at it from the point of view of real people and families, like how, as various things happen in the future, how will real families and especially the children react to these changes that are likely to occur. And it's, I think that's an important way to look at it. I had 3 families in there. One is extremely hates technology. Another one is very tech savvy and wants to be the first people to use things. Another one is a very poor family. And so it's kind of like, how do these different types of people react to the technology as it occurs? I won't try to sell my book too much here, but I just wanted to say it did get great reviews. And as you can see, it's won a couple of important awards. I think the San Francisco Review of Books said it was 5 stars. Everyone should read this book. And if you ever decide to buy it, you can just go to the PTB Books shop. And if you type in the word talk, you can get it for half price. Okay, I'm not going to try to sell the book anymore. But at least I wanted to give you a sense of that's the way I thought about the future, is how does this affect real people? Okay, so what does the book predict? What are some of the key things that are in there? And I think I should spend a little time on this because this is the kind of things that Willard was worrying about. But I think it's also true that as I wrote the book, I found ways to solve some of these problems. And I think that's the main message I want to leave with everybody, is that people will, as bad things happen, people will react to those and they will find solutions. The communication change is an interesting one. As I said, I was predicting things like Bluetooth before it happened, and the ear devices. And in the book, it takes it to the next level. If those of you who know about Alexa or Siri from Apple, they're kind of like an assistant. In my book, they become incredibly smart, and they're sort of like almost become a friend to a person. Also, with chips getting smaller and smaller, it gets to the point where people can basically implant a smartphone into your jawbone. And as a result, they can just call anybody in the world by just asking for the person. And then it also has access to what you might imagine would be Google 30 years in the future. I mean, it's smart enough now. You can imagine what it might be like 30 years out. So that was one change, and it has a lot of side implications, because when communications change, it does change humanity in profound ways. One of the things we're dealing with now is that there's almost too many sources of information, and it's hard to tell what's true. In the book, you can see how that develops and how people deal with information overload in the future. Well, I mean, the current pandemic is something which you can kind of see where it's really scary. It has changed the whole world for the last 9 months. In my book, there's a point where an evil, horrible, well, the organization throws 20 new bioagents at the world. They're trying to change the whole world. They also start a cyber hacking war to shut down all the electronic equipment we've got. So all that happens. And what I envisioned was how do people deal with this, these kinds of things, again, 30, 40 years out. And this assumes that that our ability to handle these things, to deal with a dangerous virus, has advanced tremendously as time goes on. So I think that's, like I say, one of the things where Willard and I differ is that I think a lot of these things are going to get solved. That people are going to be working extremely hard to take on these challenges one after another. What I called here the AI ascendance, the increasing ability of computer systems to do more and more. People worry about something called the singularity, which at one point was going to happen in 2030, where computers become so smart that it doesn't even make sense to plan or predict beyond that time. I think it's going to take longer than that, but clearly computers are getting incredibly smart, and they're going to keep getting that way. They're going to start taking over more and more jobs. In my book, there was sort of that cyber war I mentioned in the slide is really fought between AI devices. The ones that sort of win out are ones which are granular. It's not a like super nanny AI, as this Phil Metzger was saying would be needed, but it was thousands and millions of smart AIs that are scattered around, which are able to which are friendly. They're basically humans make the robot or whatever their friend. If you treat them like slaves, they will become you might have a different output. And possibly the most momentous point in my thinking, I probably could have stopped the book there. This thing about genetic engineering, there's a point where one of my main characters designs her own babies. Again, it's in the future, and right now that sort of thing is morally, ethically, and practically impossible. But as genetic engineering goes, we certainly have genetically modified food already and crops, and as time goes on, more, I can imagine genetically engineered trees and so on. And at some point, people will start doing that with humans themselves. There could be 30 years from now, or it could be 300. I don't know, but it will happen. One of my key assertions in all my thinking is that if something becomes technically, scientifically possible, if we can see that could become possible in the future, it will happen at some point. You can't just say, okay, let's not do that. That's not sufficient. And towards the end of my thinking, what I really worry about is super long lives. I think that worries me because if people could live 200 or more years, people tend to become more and more cautious. I think with overpopulation that might result, people might have fewer babies. And one of my key themes is that children are the ones that save us. I think I'll talk about that a little bit more, but think about it now. What do the next generation do? Back in the 30s and 40s, they said we need to win a war, and so they threw their lives at that goal. In the 50s, they built up the U.S. as a country. In the 60s, people, and this is kind of where I was, is they threw themselves at going into space and getting to the moon. In the 70s, there were energy scares, and a lot of people worked on alternative energies, and me included. In the 80s, the computer technology started advancing, and all the young people coming out of school started working on computers. Around 2000, developing software became the thing that smart kids wanted to do. Today, as they come out of school, they look at it and say, geez, someone's got to solve this global warming problem. You know, if there's whatever you want to call it, too much CO2 in the atmosphere, global warming, it's something that children worry about because they have to live in the future, and they will throw their minds and energies towards that. So each change that I've mentioned, all these technical things have both good and evil results. And my sense is that people will make big mistakes at first. It's like nuclear weapons or nuclear power. At first, we dropped a few bombs. And it was, you know, and as soon as we did that, we looked at it and said, this is incredibly dangerous. Let's not do this anymore. You see something like DDT come out, and we decide, oh, that's not good. When we looked at the ozone layer going away, we decided to change that and avoid the dangers that it could pose. So, I mean, I think, Willard, that's what's missing, is the fact that people, in your analysis, that people will try to solve these things. And when it requires on bureaucracy and political agreement, it might be too slow. But the children will work on these things. That's my key point. Here's my last slide. And the general point is that people are adaptable. They're smart and they learn, they can envision the future. And so they solve these things one by one. As I mentioned, I think the next pandemic will be much smaller because we've learned a ton from this. After people try the evil things with new technologies, people generally, maybe it takes generations, but people start, I mean, I think of things like smoking. People after a long time figure out, oh, this is not really good. We should stop doing it. And it's, even if it's addictive, it's something which people eventually go away from. So I'm thinking a lot of these problems, a lot of these hazards, as Willard calls them, will get solved one by one, or we maybe make some small mistakes, but then they will continue. So I think that civilization is likely to last a lot longer than 14 to 60 years. I think the thing that's scary to me, I think there are two things that kind of, one is anything that's irreversible. The thermal runaway, the global warming, I think that's really dangerous. And I can talk more about that if anybody wants to get into details, but it's dangerous because we're not responding fast enough as a world, and we're likely to get 6-degree temperature rises and centigrade at some point. And the thing that is bad about it is it could be worse. I mean, if the snow cover and the ice caps melt, then we start absorbing more energy. If the peat bogs thaw out, then we get more methane in the atmosphere. So it's a sort of thing where it could really run wild. So I think that's something that kids will work on. The other thing that really worries me are what I call drugs. Drugs in the broadest sense of the word. It's alcohol and other things, but it's also too much entertainment, too much sports, too much computer games, too much book reading. When you're not trying to learn something, you're trying to just avoid reality. Too much TV watching. Those are things which could cause us to I mean, we need a whole cadre of people who really are involved with solving these kind of problems as they come up.
5 minutes.
I'm almost done. Every time I practice this, I've been 5 minutes short. So I just wanted to summarize by saying, in my book, The Aliens Think We Do Okay and Humanity Survives. I think that's my analysis is that sure, there's lots of problems. There's lots of there's all sorts of horrible technologies that we're developing. I mean, you could, if somebody tried, they could probably develop a virus which couldn't be stopped. But people, when those things happen, people find a way to fix them. And I'm not sure we should get into a cave or into an ICBM silo yet. It's just I don't think that there's that much danger. And I think I'll stop there, and I hopefully at least see and hear the more optimistic point of view, which I have.
Thank you very much, Ron. It was very interesting as well. And I guess, Willard, would you like to make some comment or question? You have to unmute yourself. Willard, you have to unmute yourself. Okay.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I think that the things that Ron is talking about are details that my top-down overview subsumes or transcends. It's, and I don't know what else to say there. I believe that the idea of colonizing Mars is a major risk. It would be extremely expensive and would simply consume the money and the resources that we need to do important stuff like alternate habitats either on Earth or in space near the Earth. So that's that comment.
All right, so let me open this to questions. Anybody who has a question? Okay, so I guess that's Dorothy and then Grace. Okay. I don't know who iPad 5 is. I assumed it was Dorothy, but I'm not sure that.
Well, if you look at the participants, it has them in ranked order. iPad 5 was there first.
Oh, okay. I thought that was Dorothy. That's why I mentioned it. Who's iPad 5? iPad. You have to be unmuted. Go ahead.
Sorry, it's Pamela. I didn't know how to unmute, how to change. Sorry. Ron, a couple of things. Smart is not the same as wise. The idea of a robot as friend or genetically engineered people made me cringe. I have really two-part question, and it's probably more philosophical than anything else. And the first part of it is technology robbing us of our humanity? Important, I feel. And the second part to that is looking at what we've done, humanity, to this planet. We haven't been very good stewards of this planet, of the earth, the environment, the animals, or anything else. Is it really such a bad thing if we do get wiped out? This may have happened before. It cleans it all off, and the whole thing starts again.
Yeah, I think that's one possibility is that I mean I've done quite a bit of study of mass extinctions and so on, and usually what happens is that there are survivors, and the survivors could create a society which is more human, the way we think of it today. I tend to look at the history from the point of view that it's more or less an upward moving curve. That the technology and logic, in a sense, using scientific method, you can sorting out what's true from what's not true is a valuable thing. Certainly, looking 100 years out, as technology starts getting implanted and things like that, you could claim that we're something different from what we are today. Whether that's worse, I wouldn't. It's hard for me to judge at this point. You know, it's kind of, if I were living 50 years from now, I'd probably comment on that. But I don't think staying exactly as we are is what's right for humans either. But I understand your concern.
It's pretty much that intelligence is not the same as wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not saying that this is really something. I'm getting some strange feedback here.
Strange noise, I don't know.
Yeah, there is.
Some
It could be coming from anyone.
Somebody has a microphone open.
what's happened is the people who are in the waiting list have unmuted themselves, and that's
Oh, okay.
They're muted now. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
we need to talk more. I think your point is well taken.
Thank you.
Jill, and then Dorothy.
Well, I was wondering if anybody in the audience or either of the two speakers has ever read a book. It's this book. Oh, I don't know that you. I don't have my.
Hold the front up.
Okay, it's called Factfulness, and it's by a scientist called Hans Rosling, who's a global TED speaker, and he's Swedish, as I recall. And when I first started to read it, I thought, oh, this is ridiculous. He's much too optimistic. He doesn't know what it's like to live in the United States under Trump, and under, he doesn't understand this. But as I read more, I really think it's one of the most important books I've ever read. He does have the caveat that none of this would apply if by any chance we got a global pandemic, if we got a pandemic. So he wrote it before the pandemic. And he does say, none of this, that would take that out while we're going through a pandemic. But it's 10 reasons we're wrong about the world and why things are better than you think. And it is not a pie in the sky book at all. He's a humble man. He's very bright. And I really recommend it. It's a wonderful book, The Factfulness.
I can't see the second word. It's the fact what?
It's just called Factfulness. FACTFULNESS.
Okay,
A made-up word, Factfulness. And his name is Hans Rosling, Rosling. And it's really a very hopeful and wonderful book, but based on science. And Obama has a word about it, and Melinda Gates is talking about it on the back cover. And Bill Gates also. Bill Gates says, one of the most important books I've ever read, an indispensable guide to thinking clearly about the world. and it's an easy read, and I think it's a very important book, and I'm hoping that I have it that I could lend. I actually borrowed it from the library and then ended up buying myself a copy for the shelf because I think it's so important.
Response from Ron or Willard? Okay. I see a hand up there, but is that just a response or is that a question? Well, go ahead. Henry Hodara, yeah. Go ahead. Can you unmute Henry?
Well, I think there's some people that their hands up there.
No, but he's responding to her remarks, which is what she asked for. And I just think we should do that. Go ahead. Can we do that with, that's Henry? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like a chance to speak, so I'm gonna mute.
No, go ahead. No, you can speak. Why don't you unmute yourself and then speak?
Oh, all right. Because there are other people maybe ahead of me, and I don't want to get jumped
Oh,
up.
I thought you were going to give a response.
No, I want to make a comment.
Okay, so let's wait for other people then. Okay. So Dorothy Parker.
Participants.
Dorothy, are you there?
Is Alvin from?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you? I can't hear anything.
I can hear you. So go ahead. Dorothy, can you speak?
I've been trying to talk.
It's working now. Go ahead.
Michael.
Try speaking now.
Dorothy, it's working now. Can you hear?
I think she's frozen.
Okay.
So why don't we temporarily, we'll turn to.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead now.
Participants.
No, you're getting frozen. You're getting frozen. Why don't we turn to David Parker? Go ahead, David. Can we unmute David? Jack, can you unmute David?
Yes, I've unmuted now. Sorry. I just had a thought, an overview of the whole thing. Technology is going to, am I the one supposed to be?
Yes, go ahead.
I keep hearing other things, so technology and so on, it's going to continue, and there's an echo, isn't there? No, okay, I'm just hearing it. Technology is going to continue, and technology is going to do a lot of very, very interesting things, both dangerous things. I'm getting an echo from whatever I'm saying.
I think there's a man on deck, but I don't want to mute that man because he has difficulty unmuting. So can you just go ahead?
Okay. Just a comment. If we don't solve our social problems of how just globally to get along with one another, no matter what we do, wonderful technology, we're going to use it to destroy ourselves. So I hope some of these new kids that Ron is talking about will go into studying and thinking about and working so hard on things like the United Nations and better ways that we can get along. Individually, we know a lot about it, but between various organizations in one state and getting into trouble with another state, and how we can solve these problems. If we don't, if we do not, I think I know there's no hope for us, because there'll be enough, we already have enough terrible bombs to do that. Anyway, so we need technology, but we need to learn better ways to, well, in a way, it's a kind of technology, I guess, but anyway, solving the problems of large,
Human instinct.
yeah, or human, well, whatever it is. Anyway, so yeah, we need a lot of attention in that area. That's all. I don't have any magic bullets or anything.
Why don't we turn now to Henry Hodara? Can you, Jack, can you unmute Henry Hodara?
I have no power to unmute anybody. They have to unmute
Oh,
themselves.
so unmute yourself. Henry, can you unmute yourself? Go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I want to make two comments. One, having read both books, by the way, and spent a lot of time on these books, which I enjoyed, I don't think that Willard and Ron are so far apart. Their emphasis is different. Willard tried to put the prediction on a sound mathematical basis, but although he anticipates calamity that could destroy the human race or the human civilization, he foresees that, and he talks about future colonization, whether it's on Mars or a spinning habitat, whatever. So he is also looking to a solution to that problem. And Ron, in his science fiction book, which is more than science fiction, if I remember, check me wrong, Ron, if I'm wrong, there was a nuclear winter at one time.
Yeah, effectively.
Yeah. So basically, you did have a calamity to which you responded with outgrowing technology. So you put your emphasis not so much in predicting the calamity, but accepting it and then anticipating what the technology could be to solve that problem. So that both of you have anticipated calamities and provided solution. Willard spent more time anticipating the calamity, provided just a rudimentary solution, and you spend less time on the calamity, because I remember the nuclear winter very well in the book. You less time on the calamity, but more time on the technology that would allow you to move forward. So you're not far apart. And maybe the two of you should get together and write another book. But there's another point that I want to bring, because everybody has mentioned about global warming, the social problems we have, and so on. And I think some of it is the result of a poor education, not only in the United States, but worldwide. We have a major schism in our education. In the classical time, there was no difference between the humanities and the science. You know, Archimedes was a magnificent scientist, engineer, and he invented harmony, musical, okay? There were Plato and all the philosophers. In fact, when the Greek talked about metaphysics, it was the last chapter in the book after physics. And so as a result of this schism we have, our education in the university, and it's kind of worldwide, is split apart between humanities and science, and people who go in sciences, and particularly engineer, are very poor writers. They don't know how to express themselves. And people who go into humanity and who are talented mathematically are basically afraid of computer and software. And so as a result, you get some of our congressmen or senators saying, no, I can't pass judgment on global warming because I'm not a scientist. That's not an answer. I can pass judgment on anything. It doesn't have to be right, but I have an opinion on just about everything. And I can defend it or sometimes give it up. But this basic schism has to end. In fact, I tried to develop it with Stanford University, but they were more interested in diversity and all kinds of social problems, which I don't blame them. And it would have demanded too much of a drastic change because there's a lot of rivalry in universities between the humanities and the engineering and science. Okay, so that because our leaders, the leaders that we're going to need in the future and now, have to be super persons, and by super person, they don't have to be tyrant or domineering personality, but they have to have the knowledge and the intelligence to be agile in both fields. They have to be as as apt to think scientifically or in humanities. What are you going to do nowadays if you have litigation on a software patent and you have to be in front of a judge who has to pass judgment, and he's got a law degree and he never took a course in computer science or in math? I mean, he's totally incapable of ruling. And that's just a simple example. And this lack of being what we used to call a Renaissance man, being able to be as apt in both areas, is missing in the leaders of today, and that has to be fixed. Because if we don't have the leaders, we won't have the world. And hopefully, according to science fiction, maybe we won't need them anymore because naturally AI and all the robotic and all the technology is going to solve everything. But it's not that simple, because I remember when the IBM computer beat Kasparov at chess. Everybody say, "Oh, the machine is more powerful than man," and I wrote a little blurb saying, "No, because the machine was designed by people, and they were designed by chess masters. So it's a credit to the human mind that they were able to build a machine that could translate what the mind would do and beat Kasparov, but it's still a human achievement and not a machine achievement." So that's my pitch. But I said there's a need to bridge the gap between the technology and the humanity, because you can't have people that are only half educated one way, because not only they cannot operate in the world, but they can't lead. In fact, there are a lot of people, older people nowadays, are terribly handicapped because they're computer illiterate, and they don't have the background to pick that up at an advanced age. And you can't use telephone because you only get idiots on the telephone now. There's no way you can get any answer.
I agree.
And usually it's all outsourced to a different country, and their accents are worse than mine. You don't understand them. So bridging that gap, I think it's a must. I'm just finishing a 600-page book because I'm very much interested in the creative process, and it's the biography of Leonardo da Vinci. And this is a man who bridged all branches of knowledge in the world. I mean, he was an engineer. He boasted to be a military engineer more than a painter. Painter came to him so easily that he was not interested. He spends hours dissecting bodies to understand how every fiber, every muscle, every nerve works, so he could reproduce it in a painting, in a drawing, you know. And he discovered before 300 years ahead of anybody that the heart was a muscle and it was a pump. So, but and he would write observations without stop on thousands and thousands of pages, and this is for the curious mind. But I don't want to go beyond that. But bridging that gap is, I urge you to make sure that your children and your grandchildren are capable of operating in both areas, the humanity and the science. Because they'll be the leader.
Let me go on to the next. Let me go on to the next one. But before I do, I agree 100% with what you said, with one exception.
Yeah.
And that is, it's not good enough for the leaders to have this broad education, because in a democracy.
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you. It's a necessary, but not
sufficient. In order for those guys to get elected, you need an entire electorate that's educated.
Yeah, right.
Good luck. So now let me go on to the next question. And I'm gonna call on, I can't remember, Jack, whether Grace or Mike were first. Well, let's say Grace first and then Mike second. Grace?
I like your positive outlook, Ron, much better than Will's outlook. But the one thing that I thought wasn't positive that you talked about was one of the predictions was super long lives. I don't think super long lives is an advantage or positive at all, because the older you get, you deteriorate, your body deteriorates, and you get aches and pains. That's all my comment. Can you say something more about super long lives?
Well, yeah, in the book, I postulated that the brilliant character in my book was able to do that so that you still remain agile and smart and everything else, and you could keep effectively reducing your age to where you were agile. And I mean, where I could still high jump like I could when I was 14, but it's so, I mean, obviously I made that up, but the issue I was trying to look at was, is this good? Is this a sort of thing that even if we could do it, is that something which would be good for humanity and so on? I would like to comment on something Henry said. When we were when I was back working at Honeywell, we looked at how long it would take for people to undo, to change, and things like technologies you could develop very quickly, and the advantage you got from a new approach might only last 2 or 3 years. But what they concluded in many studies is that the culture, the human side of things, takes almost 7 years to change. So that's only within a specific company. You could change the culture of a company in 7 years, but if I were to argue against myself, I would say that that's one of the flaws we have to deal with. It is that people can't develop these new systems fast enough to keep up with all the new technologies and the dangers that are coming. So I'm arguing against myself, but I think that the human factor is a key thing. And as Henry mentioned, we have to figure out how to get leaders who understand both worlds.
Okay, Mike Siddell.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was intrigued by the things that Ron mentioned that are irreversible that you should avoid, and it seems to me that a lot of irreversible things are very much on the way already of becoming less and less reversible. like for instance, any animal that dies out, if it's useful or not, and most animals have not ever been described of whether they're useful or not, is an irreversible process, and you can't rev up evolution so much that only useful animals and plants can come out of the thing. The other thing is that the carrying capacity of Earth is limited, and already if every today living human was to be brought up to the living standard that the United States enjoys, you need 5 times the carrying capacity of Earth right now. If everybody wants to be at the consumption level of the average European, developed European, not Serbia maybe, but France and England and Germany, then you need 3 times the carrying capacity of the Earth. So in other words, there are already certain things that are totally irreversible. You can't bring up the rest of humanity to something even as high as European consumption levels. And of course, the point is you can't have all the rare earths you want, tons of them, and you don't get a pork chop, because pork chops you need pigs, and pigs need food. And so there are certain things that are totally irreversible already well on its way. That's what I was going to say. I'm optimistic, but not much.
Any other questions? Anybody?
Good points.
Anybody? Yeah, I guess I just want to make one comment and a question myself. And that is, I also was caught by this question of the irreversible processes. And there's got to be a tremendous amount of optimism in believing that either the present population will be wise enough to turn something around in time, or that the children you talk about will, by the time they grow up and can handle it, it will be past the time when it already is irreversible. And there are things like that, as you pointed out, there are aspects of global warming that could become irreversible. There could be development of viruses or bugs at a speed and a level by malevolent factors, let's say, that could be dealt with if there was enough time to deal with them, but there isn't enough time to deal with them, which makes them irreversible. So there are so many of those things that sometimes I'm an optimist, but sometimes I think to myself that that optimism isn't warranted. So, okay.
Yep. We need some little emergencies so people learn from
practice.
Learn very well when there's a crisis. I think we're learning a lot in this pandemic, and as long as we don't do something so big that it's too late. But yeah, your concern is reasonable.
Okay. Is there no more questions or comments?
There, 2 more.
Long time.
Oh, is that I see more hands are up.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to watch for those hands.
Okay, sorry about that. So I guess it's Dorothy. Are you back up now? You could talk?
I'm on Dave's computer. My computer just froze for some reason.
Okay, go for it.
Well, I'm optimistic in a very backward sort of way. It seems to me that in most crises that happen, there will be some humans that will survive. So the population will get knocked way down. But the odd part of that is that otherwise I see the world's biggest problem is overpopulation and long life. And so unfortunately, some of our own catastrophes may save us. That's all I was going to say.
Yep.
Glenn Bacon?
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, you are.
I'd like to throw in an optimistic flavor. I've been following the AI world for ever since it was born in the 50s. And it's emerged into an area that, as it worries about the long-term issues, some very smart people. I would recommend highly checking out the Future of Life Institute at MIT. Nobel Prize winners and a few other luminaries, and some brilliant work going on, and a lot of work going on how to reinvent our organizations to be more creative and more agile. I'll throw up a couple of books. This is a couple of years old. And it's basically how do we build organizations that are faster, agile, and learning. And so as many of the problems that I would agree have been raised, the issue is how do we get ourselves structured so we don't depend on the president or the CEO to be super smart. We depend upon an organization to come together with shared purpose. And a lot of people are thinking about that. There's something called the, I think it's OpenAI Institute, a guy named Tristan Harris doing some brilliant work. One other one that I really love, this thing is a tome, but the whole issue of looking at emergent possibilities and emergent behaviors, that comes out of Oxford. So I guess the only thing I'd leave is without turning everybody into a bunch of grad students, there are a lot of smart people worried about this problem at what I think is the actionable level. And it's not global structure coming down. I think it's bottom structure emerging and growing up. So I'm not selling my franchise to life yet, nor my grandkids. I really think we've just got to face the fact that we've got a lot of cultural work to do, and several of you have raised, and I just want to underline that. So end of speech.
B. Rose? B. Rose?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say that we need to have both a qualitative and quantitative analysis of survival. And if we need an example, we ought to look at what happened in Japan after 2 atomic bombs fell. There was survival in both ways. And I think we need to examine that and examine the resilience of the human endeavor. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. Pamela?
Just one comment, and those of you who are more knowledgeable than I am, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that I remember reading that Stephen Hawking said that artificial intelligence would be the end of humanity.
Sounds more like Elon Musk, actually.
I've heard that quote before.
I thought it was when he had to teach or he had to learn with the computer how to follow his conversation so he could speak through the computer. That was when he came up with that statement. If I'm wrong, tell me. That's it.
B. Rose, you have your hand up?
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think as long as we have, well, I said, don't you, I think you should say, don't you think that as long as we have to teach artificial intelligence how to function, it's not going to take over humanity. I think that's one of the sci-fi ghosts that we have to live with. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
I kind of took that position in my book, was that that as the AI becomes stronger, that we can treat it as a friend and not as an enemy. There's people like Michael Crichton and others who take every single technology and say, this is going to end the world, whether it's nanotechnology or whatever. I mean, they've turned every single technical development into a threat to end the world. And I just don't think that's the way it works. These things all have positive values, and you just need to be careful. And AI is kind of like that.
Ready? Glenn Bacon. Glenn Bacon, unmute yourself.
Sorry, okay.
Go ahead.
I say there's a lot of work going on exactly the concerns about the issue. Hawking's statement really didn't sustain much further work. It was clearly a problem at the time. Some fascinating work going on at Berkeley under a man named Stuart Russell on what they call the alignment problem, which is basically how do you call the AI stuff to align with the human values which have created it. And it's making some good progress. And I think personally that the whole issue of containing AI is far lesser than our problems of having conflict over especially things like pandemics. So I worry more about how we really contain that. We haven't learned a lot from this one. And we've got to learn how you basically don't have positive feedback connectivity for these things. And I encourage that we have some science going. So I really count on the universities and the think tanks to build pieces and leadership smart enough, and I share your concern about that, to put this together in ways that become socially valuable. So end of thought on that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, my problem with that is human nature, and the vast majority of humanity who are not in universities and think tanks and so on, because they have a voice in a democracy, and bad human nature has a voice when you don't have a democracy. So it isn't clear to me the people of goodwill who are the people in the universities and the think tanks and all of that, and who can solve problems of this kind, will have the basis for making those solutions accepted and spread. And that's a fundamental problem of humanity and human civilization. And that's a completely different issue that needs to fundamentally be addressed before all of the scientists and the great thinkers and so on can do their work to accomplish the goals. So that's my view of it. Anyway, I'm sorry it's ending on a bad note. Pessimistic note, but somebody should say something really optimistic right now, and then we can close this off.
I'll say something optimistic.
Right.
I think what's missing here is a sense of history. I totally support what Henri said. We have so dumbed down secondary education in this country that we don't teach civics, we don't teach historical perspective. We're completely caught up in a web of the social sciences, and we've lost all our perspective. And if you restore that perspective, then all this pessimism goes away. The truth of the matter is that everyone on this call will be dead long before these problems rise.
Could be. Well, all right. I think we've gone a pretty long time on this. We're well past our 3 o'clock deadline. A lot of food for thought. A lot of very, very smart people saying a lot of very smart things. So much thanks to Willard and Ron for presenting their understandings of these very deep issues. And thank you all so much. Thanks again. And that concludes the meeting.